Music. Have you ever wondered how real your control over your own life is? Before you answer, stop and think deeply. Have you really made the choices of your desires, beliefs, and fears yourself? Or have they been subtly introduced into your consciousness under the influence of family, society, and perhaps even experiences that have long been erased from memory? Each of us tends to believe in our freedom, and the fact that each of our decisions is the result of independent and rational thinking. But what if all this is just a skillfully created illusion? Carl Jung, an outstanding researcher of the human psyche, held a rather disturbing point of view on this matter. In his opinion, what we are used to calling free will often turns out to be just a reflection of the unconscious, a kind of shadow theater. In this theater, we are convinced that we are in control of the situation, but in reality, we are controlled by hidden, unknown forces lurking deep inside us. Haven't you ever wondered why the same mistakes are repeated over and over again? Why are you irresistibly attracted to certain types of people? And why do you, as if intentionally, destroy your own chances for happiness and success? If free will were really in your power, would you make a choice that inevitably leads to suffering and disappointment? The truth of life is that the vast majority of decisions made by a person are predetermined long before the moment they are realized. Childhood years form a kind of program that determines further behavior. Unresolved psychological traumas influence the perception of the world and interaction with it. The emotions that a person suppresses begin to control various aspects of their existence. The most disturbing thing is that the unconscious strives to maintain the existing order of things. It resists change and does not want the awakening of consciousness. As the famous psychologist Carl Jung noted, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct a person's life, who will call it fate. But what does this really mean? What forces secretly manipulate a person, hiding in the depths of their mind? And most importantly, is there a way to break this illusion and regain control over your own life? Before claiming that the answers are already known, it is worth thinking again because the upcoming discovery may forever change the idea of yourself. If a person really had free will, then why does he so often feel trapped in recurring life scenarios? Why, despite sincere promises to change and make a better choice, does he invariably return to the same destructive patterns of behavior? The answer to this question lies not in willpower or the ability to think rationally, but in something much deeper, in the unconscious. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung deeply understood that the unconscious is not just a storehouse of forgotten events or thoughts displaced from consciousness. This is a dynamic force that subtly influences the deep processes of thinking and determines a person's choice long before he realizes it. It makes itself known through sudden impulses, inexplicable premonitions, a strange feeling of déjà vu. For clarity, you can imagine an iceberg. The consciousness of a person, that is, his I, ego, individuality, is only a small part rising above the surface of the water. However, under the thickness of the water lies a much more massive and powerful structure, the unconscious. It contains not only memories and past experiences, but also learned, often unconsciously, attitudes. Family values, social norms, beliefs instilled in childhood. All this forms a decision-making system, even if a person has never thought about their relevance. As an example, we can cite a situation when a person repeatedly falls in love with those who cause him suffering. At a conscious level, he strives for healthy relationships, assures himself that next time, everything will be different. But, coming to his senses, he finds himself in another painful cycle. Why is this happening? The reason is that his unconscious associates love with torment. Perhaps in childhood, he received attention only in moments of sadness or vulnerability. Perhaps he grew up in an atmosphere where attachment was intertwined with emotional instability. Deeply imprinted in the mind, like an invisible program, these experiences subtly influence a person's choice. Without realizing it, he repeatedly reproduces a familiar pattern of behavior, since the main task of the unconscious is to preserve the usual way of life. The unconscious resists change. Its goal is to protect a person within the framework of learned patterns. This means that even when it seems that a decision is made rationally, the mind has already made a choice long before awareness. But how to break this vicious circle? How to escape from the invisible prison that controls a person's life? while remaining unnoticed? To find the answer, one must turn to one of Jung's most enigmatic concepts, the shadow, the hidden part of the mind that actually determines actions. If there is something within a person that shapes their choices without their knowledge, what is their true essence? How well do they know themselves? The answer may be quite surprising. According to Jung, within each of us lurks a dark side, a repressed part of the psyche that subtly influences thoughts, feelings, and decisions. He called this force the shadow. The shadow is not just an abstract philosophical concept or some abstract archetype existing only in the minds of theorists. No, the shadow is quite real, as tangible as any conscious thought flitting through a person's mind. And, most unpleasantly, this shadow has far more power over life than one would like to admit. Just think about those situations when a person reacted completely unpredictably, when their actions seemed inexplicable, even to themselves. Recall moments of sudden loss of control, when irrational hatred flared up, when one's own actions destroyed a desired opportunity, when jealousy tormented without any logic, when causeless fear gripped, when secret gloating arose at the sight of others' failures. All these reactions are the product not of the rational I, but of that very shadow that lurks in the depths of the subconscious. From early childhood, people are taught to hide certain aspects of their personality, to suppress natural expressions of feelings. One must not be selfish, one must not feel anger, one must not show weakness. And what happens in the end? A person simply buries these inconvenient emotions, pretending they do not exist at all. A kind of mask is created, a socially acceptable image, and the individual convinces themselves that they are this idealized version of themselves. However, what is carefully suppressed does not disappear without a trace. On the contrary, it only gains strength because the unconscious is not capable of forgetting. It only patiently waits for the right moment to break free and take the reins. This is how events unfold in the world of the human psyche. The shadow manifests itself in the most unpredictable ways, sometimes putting a person at a dead end. It shows through the prism of our projections when we judge others, not realizing that we are criticizing our own unaccepted qualities. Haven't you noticed how certain actions of those around you cause a storm of indignation? For example, an arrogant colleague causing irritation may only reflect a suppressed desire for self-confidence. Or a person acting impulsively evokes anger, reminding them of the strict lessons of self-control learned in the past. This is the shadow projecting itself onto the external world, finding reflection in the behavior of other people. But the shadow is capable of manifesting itself in more sinister forms. It can push one towards self-destructive actions, force one to seek situations that only amplify the deepest fears, and turn suppressed desires into obsessions. Are there not many who run from something all their lives, only to end up face to face with what they were running from? The shadow leads them along this path, and they don't even suspect it. And here arises the key question. As long as a person ignores their shadow, they will never be able to gain control over their life. They will naively believe that their decisions are dictated by their own will. But in reality, they will only be a reflection of those aspects of their personality that they refuse to face. A person will think that they are choosing their own destiny, but in reality, they will only be following an invisible script written by those parts of their self that remain in the shadows, away from the light of consciousness. If we assume that the deep processes within us possess hidden power and influence our actions, a logical question arises about the impact of the surrounding world. Are we not under the influence of some overarching force that shapes us from birth? To understand this, it is necessary to go beyond personal experience and question the established notion of us as independent individuals living in a free society. If the unconscious is capable of manipulating us on an individual level, imagine what happens when the influence of a society programmed to direct our thoughts, actions, and even feelings is added to this. From the first days of life, even before self-awareness, we are subjected to the formative influence of the world, the surrounding culture, and the invisible rules that determine what is considered right and what is not. all this creates a kind of mental labyrinth from which few manage to escape. Think about it. Did you come to your beliefs independently, or were they instilled in you by family, education, the media, and religious institutions? From childhood, we are taught to follow certain norms, avoid certain actions, and strive for certain goals. The desire to have a stable job, a beautiful house, and social recognition is not innate. These ideas are instilled in our minds, often imperceptibly. We sincerely believe we want these things because they are considered normal. However, the question that few ask is, for whom is this normal? Modern society is often not interested in developing truly free and independent individuals. On the contrary, it strives for individuals to conform to generally accepted standards, following a predetermined path that represents a predictable sequence of stages: education, employment, consumer behavior, and obedience to established rules. To ensure strict adherence to these prescriptions, society uses one of the most effective tools: emotional programming. From an early age, a person learns that any deviation from generally accepted norms entails certain consequences. An individual begins to feel guilt when their thoughts diverge from the opinion of the majority and experiences fear when challenging authority. The desire to want what everyone else wants is formed, as the most severe punishment for the human psyche is social isolation. However, what happens when everyone around has undergone similar programming? As a result, a system is formed in which each individual only reinforces the illusions of another. Consider how this manifests itself in the example of social networks, which impose a notion of happiness based on consumption and approval from others. The impression is created that to achieve happiness, it is necessary to travel, possess an ideal appearance, and constantly demonstrate success. Otherwise, a person feels like a failure. But who established these criteria? Why does such a need arise? The answer lies in the fact that society has created a scale for assessing the value of an individual, thereby turning them into a hostage in the endless pursuit of something that was never their true desire. However, perhaps the most ruthless manifestation of control over human consciousness is the very concept of morality. Carl Jung believed that a significant portion of the ideas about good and evil stems not from objective truth, but from collective conditioning. An individual adheres to norms that they have never critically analyzed. A person avoids certain actions not as a result of deep reflection, but because they have been taught to experience fear or disgust towards them. The most dangerous thing is the belief that these rules were adopted at one's own discretion. But what if all this is a grand illusion? What if the freedom in which a person is confident is just an invisible prison? If society is capable of manipulating desires, fears, and even ideas about right and wrong, then how can one trust any choice made? Is there a way to break out of this vicious circle? In the search for an answer to this question, Jung left a kind of clue, an indication of the area where the true aspirations of the soul manifest without any censorship, where masks are dropped, and where one can see what truly drives a person: the world of dreams. If there is a place where the influence of social conditioning is powerless, where the rules obeyed in real life lose their power, it is the realm of dreams. Carl Jung believed that dreams are much more than just meaningless fragments of fantasies. He viewed them as direct messages from the depths of the unconscious, as an attempt to convey to a person what their consciousness stubbornly refuses to notice. In waking hours, people tend to wear masks, conform to generally accepted norms, and find rational explanations for their actions. However, when sleep comes, the true essence comes to the surface. It is worth pondering one's own dreams. Surely everyone has had to wake up after a strange dream, wondering about its meaning. Perhaps they dreamed of being stuck in a labyrinth, repeatedly returning to the same point, unable to find a way out. Or perhaps they dreamed of fleeing from something unknown, from which it is impossible to hide. And even more interesting is when a version of oneself appears in a dream, but more liberated, courageous, and real. All this is not just chaotic images generated by the mind. These are symbols, encrypted messages from the subconscious, indicating what a person does not want or cannot see in a state of wakefulness. Jung concluded that dreams often reveal suppressed desires and fears, expose those parts of the personality that have been banished into the shadow, impulses that are denied, traumas that are buried deep inside, and truths that a person is not ready to accept. Imagine a person who tirelessly strives for virtue, self-control, and strict discipline, yet in the depths of their dreams encounters displays of impulsivity, aggression, and even forbidden desires. Does this mean that evil lurks in their soul? Not at all. It merely testifies to the existence of areas in their psyche that have been suppressed and are now desperately seeking recognition. Dreams serve as a kind of mirror, reflecting the true motives and aspirations that drive a person. For example, someone who finds comfort and stability in their daily routine, but constantly dreams of being lost in an unfamiliar place is likely suppressing a deeply rooted need for change and new experiences. Or say an individual who prides themselves on their rationality and logical thinking, but experiences turbulent and uncontrolled emotions in their dreams may be stifling important aspects of their personality that crave expression. The unconscious, like a wise counselor, never lies. It always finds ways to manifest itself, whether through symbols, metaphors, or vivid images. However, the most unsettling thing is that dreams often reveal that our choices are not really our own. How many times have you dreamed of walking down a road only to suddenly realize that you don't know where it leads? Or of finding yourself in a strange house full of doors, but unable to find an exit? These images serve as metaphors for situations occurring in real life. We follow directions that we never question, get stuck in cycles that seem familiar, but we don't know where they came from. These dreams encourage us to think about who we really are and what we truly want from life. So, a natural question arises. If dreams serve as a kind of portal into the depths of our true aspirations and hidden fears, how can we use this valuable knowledge? How can we subdue this symbolic language to regain control of our own lives? The key to the answer lies in a concept that Carl Jung considered the cornerstone of human existence, the process of individuation, a path that only a few dare to embark on. If everything that has been learned up to this point is true, then until now, a person has never been truly free. Decisions are influenced by the unconscious, beliefs are shaped by society, and hidden desires manifest only in the realm of dreams. But if free will is just an illusion, does that mean we are doomed to be puppets, trapped by forces beyond our control? Jung was convinced that this was not the case. He believed that there is a way to break this invisible, vicious circle. But this path is by no means a bed of roses. It requires courage to face the most difficult truth, the truth about oneself. This process, known as individuation, represents a unique chance to achieve genuine freedom. Individuation is a complex and multifaceted process of uniting all the elements of the human psyche into a single whole. It is a journey into the depths of oneself, requiring the courage to face one's own shadow, those aspects of personality that the individual tries to ignore or deny in themselves. The process of individuation involves a critical analysis of beliefs that a person takes for their own, but which are actually the result of external influences. It is important to realize that many aspirations and desires may not be true needs, but merely a reflection of what has been instilled from the outside. The first step on the path to liberation from the illusion of absolute free will is to recognize the limitations of control over one's own life. As long as a person is convinced of the rationality of their decisions, does not realize the influence of fears, and does not recognize that the past shapes their reactions in the present, they remain captive to their own delusions. The second important step is to explore the depths of the unconscious. It is necessary to carefully observe automatic reactions, recurring patterns of behavior, situations where actions are performed impulsively without thinking. Dreams become a valuable source of information, as they contain messages that the conscious mind usually ignores. Reflections on the behavior of other people, especially what causes strong irritation, can serve as a mirror, reflecting suppressed aspects of one's own personality. However, the most difficult task is the conscious resistance to the conditioning that keeps a person captive. This involves revising established beliefs, breaking habitual patterns of behavior, and choosing paths that may cause fear but correspond to the true essence of the personality. It is at this point that the process of forming one's own life begins, rather than simply reacting to external influences. Individuation is not a final goal, but a continuous journey. It is impossible to achieve a state of completion, as the human psyche is alive, dynamic, and constantly evolving. Nevertheless, each step along this path signifies the return of a part of the authentic self that was once hidden in the shadows of the unconscious. In this regard, a logical question arises. What happens to those who recognize this invisible prison while most people live their lives unaware of its existence? If a person dares to look behind the veil and see the illusion of free will, how will this affect their life? And more importantly, how will it change their perception by others? The vast majority of people are unaware of the shackles that bind their existence. They live their days following an unspoken script, naively believing that their decisions are dictated by personal will. Their aspirations come from the depths of their souls, and their beliefs are the product of independent thought. And perhaps this is for the best, because the revelation of truth comes at a considerable price. Once you have glimpsed the illusory nature of the world, there is no turning back. As Jung astutely noted, awakening to the true reality of the unconscious brings not peace, but rather psychic discomfort. The realization that a significant part of life has been under the control of invisible forces creates a strange feeling, a peculiar mixture of freedom and poignant longing. One is no longer a mere pawn on a chessboard, but now bear the burden of responsibility for defining one's true essence. And this is terrifying. One need only look around to see how many people, like puppets, repeatedly fall into the same traps, repeat hackneyed mistakes, and hypocritically justify their actions, without even trying to question the origins of their behavior. They firmly believe that they control their lives, that they truly know who they are. However, it has now become clear that this is far from the case. The unconscious rules us to a much greater extent than we are willing to admit. And herein lies the true dilemma: what to do with the acquired knowledge. One is free to ignore the newly opened horizons of understanding and continue to exist in the usual rut, as if there had been no moment of revelation. However, there is another path: to begin applying the acquired knowledge in practice, carefully tracking one's own impulses, questioning established beliefs, and analyzing deep-seated desires. Embarking on this path, one should be prepared for rejection from society. After all, those who have freed themselves from the veil of illusion and are able to see the world in its true light involuntarily become a threat to those who are still in a state of spiritual slumber. Awakened minds, striving for truth and awareness, often face resistance from those who prefer to remain in their comfort zone, unwilling to question the usual order of things.